I used to believe that when you married someone, you automatically became part of their family. Not just legally, but emotionally. You're welcomed in, included, loved. That's what I thought, until the day I was standing at the airport, suitcase in hand, and realized I had never really belonged. My name is Rachel Monroe, and I've been married to Ethan for 6 years. Ethan is a good man, kind, laid back, but when it comes to his family, he's blind. They live out in the quiet suburbs of North Carolina. On the outside, the Monroe family is picture perfect. Smiling holiday cards, Sunday dinners, polite laughter. But behind closed doors, I was invisible. Or worse, I was useful. For years, I tried everything. I helped organize Thanksgiving, cleaned the family cabin every summer, memorized everyone's birthdays, made sure his mother's favorite wine was always on hand. I thought if I gave enough, they'd see me as one of their own. I was wrong. It all came crashing down the morning of our big family vacation. We'd planned it for months, a week-long trip to Cancun, everyone together. Ethan and me, his parents, his brother and sister-in-law, even the nieces and nephews. I arranged pet sitters, requested time off work, and even double-checked all our passports. I was ready. At the airport, Ethan's mom, Diane, stood in the check-in line passing out tickets. Everyone got theirs. I smiled and reached out for mine. She paused, blinked at me like she hadn't seen me standing there. "Oh, Rachel, I didn't get you a ticket." I froze. "I sent you my information, twice." Diane shrugged, completely unfazed. "I must have forgotten, but honestly, it might work out. Someone needs to stay back and take care of the apartment. And Simba, you know how stressed he gets without someone home." Simba wasn't my cat, he was hers. I turned to Ethan, hoping, begging, for him to speak up. He didn't. He just looked at his shoes and muttered, "I'm sure it's just a mistake." But it wasn't. Not one person in the group even looked surprised. His brother avoided my eyes. His sister-in-law gave me a half-hearted smile. No one said anything. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. They never intended for me to come. They had just been too cowardly to say it out loud. I had a choice. I could cry, get angry, beg Ethan to do something. But in that moment, a strange calm washed over me. I smiled. "You're right, Diane. Someone should stay and take care of things." She beamed, patting my arm like I was a helpful assistant. "That's the spirit, sweetie." I turned, walked away, and never looked back. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't scream. I didn't even call my best friend to vent. I sat in our too-quiet condo, surrounded by vacation bags and neatly packed clothes, and I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn my place. About every moment I swallowed my pride to make them comfortable. And about how little it mattered. I looked at the calendar we had pinned on the fridge, highlighted dates, checklists, packing reminders. I saw my handwriting next to Ethan's, and then I laughed. Not out of joy, but out of clarity. They thought I'd stay back. Play house sitter, make grocery runs, keep things tidy while they sipped margaritas on white sand beaches. They had no idea who they were dealing with. That night I booked a room at a quiet lodge up in Asheville. Mountains, pines, silence. No Diane, no Ethan. I messaged a neighbor to check in on Simba. Then I packed a new bag, not the one labeled for Cancun, a fresh one with books, comfy clothes, and the perfume I wore when I used to feel like myself. I left a note on the counter. "Don't wait for dinner. I'm out finding the version of me you forgot existed." Then I walked out. The lodge was warm, the air crisp. I ordered a bottle of red wine and took a long bath with the window cracked open to the stars. And for the first time in 6 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt real, alive. Somewhere, Diane would come home to an empty condo. No dinner, no folded laundry, no Rachel. And I hope she realized that the quiet she loved wasn't so lovely when no one was there to clean up after it. But honestly, I didn't care what she realized. Because this wasn't about her, it was about me. And I was finally learning that I didn't need a plane ticket to be free. 3 days passed. 3 whole days of silence. No calls from Ethan. No texts from Diane. Nothing from the Monroe clan. I didn't expect much from them. But part of me thought Ethan, at least, would check in. Say something. Anything. But he didn't. And that told me everything I needed to know. I spent those days soaking in peace. Long hikes, warm coffee on the porch, painting, something I hadn't done since college. I didn't post anything on social media. I didn't update anyone. I simply existed, quietly and for once without feeling guilty about it. Until the silence broke. It was 8:43 p.m. on a Thursday when my phone buzzed. Ethan, hey, we're back. Where are you? I stared at the screen. That was it? No sorry, no explanation, no I missed you, just confusion. I let it sit there. Then the flood began. Diane, Rachel, this isn't funny. The condo is a mess. Simba's litter box is overflowing. Where are you? Ethan again. Babe. Come on, don't make a big deal. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? They left me, excluded me, treated me like staff, and now I was making a big deal? I turned off my phone. They weren't panicked for me. They were panicked for themselves. Big difference. The next day, I drove into town, sat at a little cafe with a chai latte, and stared at the mountains in the distance. The air felt clearer up here. Lighter. I wasn't angry anymore. I was detached. That was scarier. I used to cry when Ethan forgot to call on his lunch break. Now I wasn't even flinching when he forgot to bring me on a family vacation. When I got back to the lodge that afternoon, I found a handwritten letter from the front desk. Delivery for Rachel Monroe. Hand-delivered by a man in a green SUV. I opened it. Ethan's handwriting. Rachel, I'm sorry things got messy. Mom said she didn't mean to leave you out, and I thought you were okay with staying. I should have said something. I should have checked. Please come home. We need to talk. I folded the note. The word we stuck in my throat. He hadn't asked how I felt. He hadn't acknowledged the years of being left out, overlooked, dismissed. He just wanted things back to normal. But normal for me had been breaking my back emotionally so everyone else could be comfortable. I wasn't going back to that. The next message came from Ethan's sister-in-law, Marla. We weren't close, but she was always polite. I know this isn't my place, but for what it's worth, I saw how Diane treated you. We all did. I should have spoken up. I'm sorry. That stopped me. The silence hadn't just been betrayal. It had been compliance. And now that the foundation was cracking, they were crawling out of the corners. Not to help me, but to make sure they weren't blamed when it all collapsed. That evening, I stood on the balcony with a glass of wine. The sky streaked pink and violet. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, if you're not going to talk to me, at least tell me if you're safe. Mom is freaking out. She says this is really irresponsible. I chuckled softly. Irresponsible? I had managed her grocery lists, her dog's vet appointments, even scheduled her anniversary dinner with her husband. And now I was irresponsible because I didn't want to be the one they dumped their chaos on. I typed back, I'm safe, but I'm not your fixer anymore. And hit send. The next morning, Ethan showed up. I was sipping coffee in the lodge lobby when I saw him through the window, pacing, hands on his hips, face tight. When he walked in, his eyes found mine instantly. He looked tired. Like someone who hadn't had anyone cleaning up after him for a few days. Rachel, he said, walking over. We need to talk. I sipped my coffee. You're talking. He hesitated, clearly thrown by my calm. I know you're upset, but can we not do this here? Can we go home and talk? Home? I echoed. You mean your mom's house? Because that's who you took on vacation. He winced. I didn't think it through. No, I said, setting my mug down. You didn't think about me. He sat across from me. Look, I didn't know she left you out of the flight list. I thought she handled everything. And what did you do when she handed you a boarding pass and skipped me? You just stood there, Ethan. He ran a hand down his face. I thought it was a mistake. I leaned in slightly. And if it was your brother's wife standing there without a ticket? He didn't answer, because we both knew. He would have made a scene. But for me? He stayed quiet. Because keeping the peace with his family was easier than standing up for his wife. I stood. I don't hate you, Ethan. I just finally see you. He looked up, eyes wide. What's that supposed to mean? It means I see the truth, I said calmly. I was never part of your family. I was just the one making it look like we had one. Then I turned and walked away. He didn't follow me, because for the first time in 6 years, I didn't let him. It had been a week since I walked away from Ethan in that Mountain Lodge cafe, and true to form, he didn't chase me. He didn't fight. And that silence, it told me everything I needed to know. I didn't belong to him. I belonged to me now. I checked out of the lodge and drove back to Raleigh. But not to our apartment. That place didn't feel like mine anymore. I rented a small Airbnb in town, something bright and temporary, the kind of space that didn't carry memories like ghosts in the walls. My phone stayed mostly silent, except for the messages I didn't read, from Ethan, from Diane, from his brother. Each one a shade of confusion, guilt, and control. We didn't mean to hurt you. You're overreacting. This isn't how families handle conflict. But I wasn't family, remember? I was the woman they left at the airport. I spent the next few days doing something radical. Living. I bought a sketch pad and started drawing again. I went to a yoga class. I sat in coffee shops and let the world move around me without feeling like I had to manage anyone's schedule, feelings, or grocery list. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Freedom always is at first. Then came the email. From Diane. Subject line, "Let's be adults." I almost deleted it, but something told me to open it. The message was long, nearly a full page of faux politeness, half apologies, and veiled guilt tripping. I realize now that leaving you behind at the airport may have come off as careless, but it truly wasn't personal. You know how chaotic travel planning can be. I snorted. Chaotic? Diane ran their vacation like a military operation. Nothing, and I mean nothing, was accidental. Then came the part that really got me. We've all had a difficult time without you. Ethan is distraught. Simba misses you. The apartment needs cleaning. Maybe it's time to put this behind us? Put this behind us? She left me. They all did. And now they wanted me back, not because they loved me, but because they needed me. Big difference. That night, I opened my laptop and did something I should have done years ago. I Googled divorce attorneys. The website of one firm caught my eye. Compassionate, fierce, and focused. Perfect. I made an appointment for the next morning. I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't tell anyone. This wasn't for them. This was for me. The office was modern, minimalist, like stepping into a version of my life I hadn't dared to imagine yet. The attorney, Miss Jordan King, had calm eyes and a sharp voice. She didn't ask if I was sure. She just asked what I wanted. I don't want the apartment, I said. It's technically under both names, she replied. He can have it, I said. I want a clean break. No shared keys, no shared cats, nothing. She nodded. I can do that. And just like that, it began. The unbuilding, the unraveling, the rebirth. A few days later, I stopped by his apartment to collect the last of my things while he was at work. I didn't want a scene. I didn't want to explain. I packed quietly, my sketchbooks, my grandmother's scarf, a mug I bought in Italy before I met Ethan. I left behind the rest, the framed wedding photo, the key rack with both our names on it, the bottle of perfume Diane once said made me smell too strong. As I closed the door for the final time, I didn't cry. I smiled, because finally I was no longer in a place where I was only allowed to belong. I had chosen not to. That evening, I got a message from Marla, Ethan's sister-in-law. They're all freaking out. Ethan thought you'd cool off and come back, but I told him, she's gone, for real this time. Also, Diane's been calling the cleaners. Apparently no one's done laundry since you left. I let out a laugh, not a bitter one, a real one. It was amazing how many things they'd expected me to silently handle, from dishes to dysfunction. And now, they had to sit in their own mess. Ethan finally called, not a text, a real call. I stared at the screen, then answered. His voice was quiet. Rachel, are you really doing this? I already did it, I said simply. There was a pause. I didn't think you'd actually leave. That's the problem, I replied. You thought I'd stay no matter what. I didn't think it was that bad. I took a breath. You left me behind, at an airport, for a family trip, and when I looked to you to stand beside me, you stood behind them. I didn't want to make waves, he muttered. I smiled sadly. Well, now you're drowning. Click. I hung up, and I didn't feel guilt. I felt air in my lungs for the first time in years. That night, I opened my sketchbook and drew something new. Not a face, not a house, not a memory, but a door, slightly open, and behind it, sunlight, because that's what this was, not an ending, a beginning. It had been 11 days since I walked away from Ethan, 11 days of silence, no responding, no returning, no bending, and that was when they started to unravel. First came the subtle desperation. The calls doubled, the messages tripled. I ignored them all. Then came the guilt bombs. Ethan, I talked to Mom. She said she's sorry. Can we at least meet and talk? Diane, Rachel, families fight, but they also forgive. You're still family. I read that line 3 times. Still family? What part of forgotten at the airport felt like family to them? What part of you can stay behind and watch the apartment sounded like love? No. I had been convenient. Now I was gone. and for the first time they were feeling the weight of what I used to carry. A week later, I was sitting on a park bench near the river when my phone rang. Again. This time it wasn't Ethan. It was Anna Monroe, Ethan's cousin. Someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. "Rachel, I just wanted to say, I see you. I always did. What they did, it was cold. You deserve better." I stared at the screen. For a second I felt vindicated. Someone saw me. But then came the second message, from Marla. "Okay, real talk. Diane is having a meltdown. Ethan's a mess. The apartment's a disaster and Simba won't stop scratching the walls." I smirked. The emotional glue was gone. Now the cracks were turning into craters. By the time the divorce papers were formally served, the silence shifted, from chaos to fury. Diane finally snapped. She sent a long, unfiltered email titled, "You ungrateful girl." Inside, she listed all the things I had ruined. The Cancun trip, tainted because I left in such a dramatic way. Ethan's stability, as if I were the only thing keeping him grounded. The Monroe family piece, translation, their ability to walk all over me without consequences. She ended it with a line that made me laugh out loud. "You should have talked to us. We would have forgiven you." Forgiven me? They left me, excluded me, gaslit me, and now I needed forgiveness? No, Diane. You don't get to play victim in a mess you created. Later that night, Ethan tried one more time. This time, he texted something that actually gave me pause. "I know I didn't protect you. I know I let you stand there alone at the airport. I regret it. I regret all of it." I sat with that for a minute. Regret is powerful, but it's not redemption, I replied. You regret the consequences, not the choices. I spent years waiting for you to choose me. You never did. And now that I've chosen myself, you're scared. Not of losing me, but of losing your comfort. He didn't respond. That told me everything. The next morning, I checked my email and found a message from my divorce attorney. Subject line, "Everything finalized." That was it. My name was mine again. My life was mine again. My future, finally, mine. I walked downtown that day with a new energy, like I had shed something I didn't know I was carrying. In the window of a little boutique gallery, I saw a sign. Local Artists Showcase. Submissions open. I walked in. The owner, a woman with silver hair and wild earrings, greeted me like she'd been waiting. I showed her some of my sketches, raw, emotional pieces I hadn't let anyone see since college. She stared at them for a long moment, then looked up and said, "These feel like someone finally telling the truth." I smiled. Exactly. That night I lit a candle in my small apartment. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Of healing, of breath, of me. And across town, I imagined Ethan sitting in his apartment, alone, staring at the couch I once curled up on after work, the bookshelf I organized, the lamp I bought, the silence he once enjoyed, now pressing on his chest like a weight. I imagined Diane staring at her calendar, realizing no one had remembered to book her dental appointment or pick up her dry cleaning or arrange Sunday dinner. They hadn't lost a helper. They lost the backbone of their carefully curated life, and they didn't even know it until it was gone. But me? I had gained something far more valuable than their acceptance. I had found myself again. It had been a month since I walked away. 1 full month since the airport. Since the silence. Since the moment I finally said, enough. I'd signed the divorce papers, blocked the Monroe family, changed my number, moved into a new place, and started rebuilding from the ground up. But the ripple effect of my departure? It was just beginning. It started small. A message from Marla, again. Diane's completely overwhelmed. She's been trying to handle everything herself, and now the house is falling apart. Then Anna chimed in. The family's splitting. No one wants to take her side anymore. It was like watching a house collapse in slow motion, brick by brick, and realizing you were the one holding it up all along. And the best part? I wasn't even doing anything. Just not being there. Turns out that was enough. I got a message from Ethan a few days later. I almost didn't read it. But the subject line caught me. You win. I opened it. The email was short. I get it now. You weren't overreacting. You were done. And I didn't see it until it was too late. Everyone's falling apart. I've been trying to pick up the pieces, but it's too much. I don't blame you for leaving. I'd leave too if I could. There was no request, no apology, no solution. Just defeat. For a man like Ethan, raised to think silence was safer than conflict, that was louder than any scream. But what he didn't realize? This wasn't about winning. It was about waking up. And no, I didn't need to respond. Some lessons don't need teachers, just consequences. Later that week, I walked into the boutique gallery, the one that had accepted my art, and saw it. My sketch framed, hanging in the front window, titled simply, Absence. It was a black and white drawing of a dinner table, messy, half-cleared, a chair pushed back slightly, empty. The gallery owner grinned. People are really connecting with your work, I nodded. Pain has a way of speaking, I said softly. And oh, mine had learned to scream. That night I got an unexpected knock at the door. My heart jumped, just for a second. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it slowly, and there she was. Diane, wearing pearls, hair neat, but her eyes were panicked. Rachel, she said, hands gripping her purse, please, I just need a moment. I didn't speak, she continued. I know I haven't been fair. I know I wasn't kind, but the house, the family, it's falling apart. I leaned against the doorway. And, her eyes welled up, we need you. There it was. Not, I miss you. Not, I'm sorry. Just, we need you. Even now, it wasn't about love. It was about usefulness. I'm not coming back, I said plainly. She blinked. But Ethan made his choices. Her voice cracked. So that's it? You're just gone? I was gone long before I left, I replied. You just didn't notice. She stepped back like I'd hit her. I softened, just slightly. Diane, I used to want your approval so badly. I did everything to earn it, and it was never enough. Tears threatened at the edges of her eyes. It wasn't personal, she whispered. That, I said, is the saddest part. I closed the door gently, and I didn't feel regret. I felt peace. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text. A handwritten note from Ethan. It was short, just one line. I let you stand alone for too long. You don't have to forgive me, but I will never forgive myself. I stared at the words for a long time, and then I folded the note, placed it in a box, not to hold on to, but to remind myself, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. In the weeks that followed, my art started gaining traction. I sold my first piece, got invited to join a local collective. People started asking me questions like, where have you been hiding? I smiled every time. I wasn't hiding, I'd say. I was surviving. Now, I was living. And somewhere across town, in that quiet apartment I used to call home, a man sat in silence, next to the ghost of a woman who used to keep everything from falling apart. He didn't miss me. He missed what I did for him. And when people finally understand the difference, that's when it really hurts. But that was no longer my problem. The sun was rising over the city skyline as I sipped my coffee in silence. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. It had been nearly 2 months since I walked away from Ethan. Since I walked away from everything I thought made me valuable, the roles I had clung to. Wife, daughter-in-law, fixer, peacekeeper. Now, I was just Rachel. And for the first time, that was enough. I moved into a small loft on the edge of downtown. Exposed brick, a skylight, a tiny balcony filled with herbs I'd planted myself. The space was mine, not just legally, but spiritually. No one else's voice lived here. No one else's expectations. Just me and the quiet hum of a new beginning. The gallery I had submitted my art to, they offered me a featured exhibit. My drawings, once hidden in dusty sketchbooks, were now framed and lit for strangers to feel something from. People stood in front of my work and cried. One woman told me, "This piece, it feels like you painted my marriage." I smiled and said, "I didn't paint your marriage. I painted my escape." She hugged me anyway. I no longer checked my phone hoping Ethan had messaged. I no longer rehearsed conversations I'd never get to have with Diane. I didn't need closure from them. I was the closure. A letter arrived one day from Anna, just 3 lines. You inspired me. I'm leaving too. I've been silent too long. Thank you for showing me how to walk away. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's legacy. I was walking home from the market one afternoon, holding a bag of fresh strawberries and rosemary, when I saw someone standing outside my building. Tall, nervous, familiar. Ethan. He saw me and straightened. Rachel. I stopped. He didn't move closer. I'm not here to ask you for anything, he said quickly. I just needed to say something, face to face. I waited. I've spent weeks trying to make sense of it all, he said, of what I let happen, what I didn't fight for, and I realized I didn't just lose you. I never really saw you. I said nothing. He continued, you were the glue, and I let them treat you like wallpaper. That hit me harder than I expected, but still I didn't cry. I nodded once. Thank you. He looked at me like he wanted to say more, but for once he didn't. He just walked away. And I let him. That night I lit a candle on my balcony and looked out at the city. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't thinking about what they lost. I was thinking about everything I had gained. My peace, my freedom, my voice. I used to think revenge meant making them feel what I felt. But real revenge is healing, is thriving, is walking into the life they never thought you could build without them. A few weeks later, I booked a solo trip, not to escape, but to explore. I boarded a plane, passport in hand, looking out the window as the city shrank beneath me. I wasn't the woman they left behind at the airport anymore. I was the woman flying toward her future, on my own terms. And that was the most powerful ending of all.